Good evening, families. Welcome to our family webinar series. My name is Heather Deer, and I am the Assistant Director of Parent and Family Programs at William & Mary. We're thrilled that you're able to join us this evening as we discuss student accessibility services at William & Mary and all of the wonderful support resources that will be available to your student. Before we get started, I have just a few tips for during our webinar. We use the Q&A function to ask questions, so you will find that at the bottom of your screen labeled Q&A. You can type your questions there in the box, and you can ask as many questions as you would like during the presentation. We will get to all of those at the very end. Again, we are thrilled that you are able to join us, and please feel free to submit questions throughout. I am joined by two of my wonderful colleagues who are going to share tons of information and helpful tips with you this evening about student accessibility services. And with that, I am going to turn the presentation over to them. They will introduce themselves and we will get started. Welcome, Leslie and Anna.
Hi everyone, I'm Leslie Henderson, and this is my 6th year as the Director of Student Accessibility Services. I'm so excited that you're here tonight. You probably have lots of questions, and that's why you're here, and hopefully we will answer them tonight. I'm also assisted by my wonderful coordinator, Anna Whiston. I'll let her introduce herself really quick, and then I'll get started with the slides.
Hi everyone, as Leslie said, I'm Anna Whiston, Coordinator for Student Accessibility Services, and we're so happy you could join us tonight.
So we are William & Mary Student Accessibility Services, and if you've toured campus, we're located on the corner of Jamestown and South Boundary Street. We're in the campus center. We are on the first floor if you're ever navigating your way through that area. We also have a testing center in addition to our offices, so students can come and take proctor tests with us in the Watson Testing Center, as it's called. In addition to Anna, who's introduced herself, we also have Courtney McMasters, who will be our graduate assistant, and she performs many of the same functions that we perform, so she may be working directly with students just as we are. And one of the happy voices on the other end of the phone, or the happy face as you enter the office, is Alicia Harlow, and she is our administrative assistant and helps with questions, helps with making sure students have appointments set up, and helps navigate kind of your first point of contact in terms of entry into student accessibility services. Our contact information is there as well. William & Mary is committed to providing equal educational opportunity for all academically qualified students in keeping with legal requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act and long-held institutional goals. So in addition to simply meeting the minimum requirements of ADA accommodation, we also want to make sure we serve your students as well as we possibly can. We serve myriad diagnosed conditions, and a lot of times students may not even think of themselves as having a disability, but even something like allergies or asthma could be considered a disabling condition according to the Americans with Disabilities Act. So here are some of the many different diagnoses we serve in terms of student needs. Again, not an exhaustive list. So if your student has a diagnosed condition that may be impacting the success with which they can live on campus, or they may need something to make sure they have an equitable academic experience, then we definitely want to have a conversation and see what we can do to support your student while they're at William & Mary. We really want to congratulate you because it takes a team to make sure a student gets to this point. We're very proud that your student is here with us at William & Mary, and we want to acknowledge all the hard work and perseverance that you as parents have also had along the way. So congratulate yourselves for a job well done. For those of you who may already be familiar with special education in the K-12 setting, I thought it would be helpful to go over some of the similarities and differences in K-12 services versus post-secondary, because there's actually 2 different laws, one for K-12, which is IDEA, and the post-secondary law that applies here is Americans with Disabilities Act and the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. There are some differences, and I can speak to both. I've worked in K-12 as a school psychologist for 12 years prior to having this position, so I do have a pretty good lay of the land with K through 12 education and special education, as well as 504 plans. So I like to say I went to elementary school and secondary school, K through 12 for 12 years, and then I graduated and now I'm working at the university. In terms of K through 12 education, often the school or parents are responsible for identifying students with disabilities. The school helps as part of that process in determining criteria according to educational laws. For post-secondary education, students themselves self-select into getting served through student accessibility services. So rather than a child find service or the school helping to identify students, we certainly want them to come to us, but it's really up to the student to opt in or out of any kind of ADA accommodations or even registering to have their disability services. We think there are a lot of benefits for students to go ahead and do that, but we do respect that it's their decision. So you probably know, if you're familiar with K through 12 education, that students with diagnosed conditions who need extra support in terms of accommodations might have an IEP or a 504 plan. At William & Mary, we offer accommodations letters, which is pretty standard for any institution. So it'll be a letter stating that these are the accommodations which have been determined to be appropriate for your student in order to have an even playing field. So some schools ask students to bring these letters to each of their professors if they have academic accommodations. We help streamline the process a little more. We have a system in which we send the notifications to the specific instructors based on students' academic accommodations. Students are still required to communicate with professors, and it's very important that they do so, but we do help reduce some of the carrying around a piece of paper and having it signed by everyone by this electronic letter process. And of course, as parents, you have been active members of your student's process if you've had a student with an IEP or a 504 plan, and we certainly are happy to engage with you here, but we're also helping you turn over the reins to the student to make sure that they're managing their own needs and they're becoming their self-advocates. And they may already be great self-advocates, and that's wonderful, but we are also here to help them. And of course, FERPA comes into play too. So at times there are things that we may or may not be able to discuss with you. We hope that we can always have an open door, but we do also have to respect FERPA guidelines. So with that, I will turn over to the next slide. There are 4 main types of requests. So academic accommodations, we've touched on those a little bit and how that works here at William & Mary. There are also housing accommodations. So students may need something like air conditioning, which is one of the ones listed below. They may also need other specific kinds of housing accommodations, and we are here for those too. So if a student needs to make sure that their environment is accessible, that they have points to get in and out of the building if they're in a wheelchair, or if they need a special kind of alarm system that goes off because they have a hearing impairment and there may be a fire alarm and they don't want to miss it. We have special equipment for that too. So there's many different things that can come into play with housing, and we're here to help with that as well. Of course, air conditioning, it is the Southeast. We do live in a swamp here in Williamsburg. And so if a student has a medical need for air conditioning, we're here to help with that process. And then we do have a few students who can be approved for parking on campus because they have medical appointments that are frequent and that are far enough away that they can't get there through public transportation. So we can talk about that as well if students have those needs while they're at William & Mary. I just wanted to point you in the direction of our website, which is www.wm.edu/SAS. And within that page, we have the documentation and form section, and that will include all the forms that we reference here this evening. So regarding academic accommodations, we wanted to walk you through the process because we know that a lot of people at this point are trying to figure out, what do I need to do? What do I need to do to activate accommodations? What do I need to do to get air conditioning? What do I need to do to get a special housing accommodation? So we wanted to kind of talk you through the process so you have a sense of the flow of the process. So the first thing we want students to do is to complete the self-registration. We've linked that information here, and my understanding is that Heather will be able to let you have these slides afterwards so that you can click on the hyperlinks. Now, depending on the nature of the diagnosed condition, we have different kinds of documentation. For a learning disability, we do require a psychoeducational evaluation. We encourage it to be on the more recent side in the last 3 to 5 years. That said, talk to us and ask us, about the length. We can review it and let you know if you feel like we need additional information. But we do understand that there is some expense to getting those psychoeducational evaluations completed. So we want to talk to you. We try to be as flexible as possible. It helps when students are, when adult norms or when they've reached a certain age and they have those adult norms to compare to, that's a good indicator for us. And then ADHD and ADD, we do prefer psychoeducational evaluations. That said, we will also accept the academic accommodation request form, which is on our website and that we refer to. That is something that a physician fills out and the student fills out the first part. Physician fills out the second part. They could be sent to SAS together or separately. However we receive them is fine, and we can put them in the student's confidential file that will maintain all of their academic accommodation information. If they have any sensory, speech and language, physical or medical diagnoses, the academic accommodation request form is the way to go. And same for the mental health or developmental diagnoses, academic accommodation request form or a psychoeducational evaluation. Either one of those can really be helpful to us in helping determine what will give the student equitable access on campus. So once the self-registration form is completed, the documentation submitted, you can schedule an appointment with a staff member. And honestly, we'll take an appointment with students anytime to talk them through this process. It's okay if they don't have step 2 completed when they talk to us. But we usually review everything before we submit the accommodation letter. So there are a couple of ways to submit to get an appointment with us. We do have online appointment booking, which has been really helpful. We can meet by Skype or phone through the online appointment booking, or you can contact our office and our administrative assistant will help set you up. Any approved accommodations are then sent to the student's William & Mary email. We help students navigate the Accommodate system, which is our system or our portal for all things accommodations. Students will complete the online renewal process at the beginning of each semester for accommodations to be sent to the correct professors. So that's important. We usually encourage students to try to wait until they have their schedule set because there's a lot of jumping around from class to class during the add drop period. That said, if there is a change, if students will just notify us, we can make sure that the correct professors get the correct letters because we don't want to miss someone. And the student is also responsible for following up with professors and SAS staff as necessary to activate accommodations. We are here throughout this process to help students through if they have any challenges with self-advocacy or if they need any additional assistance, or maybe they think maybe their accommodation isn't what they need or they thought of a different one. This is always a continuous process throughout their entire time here. Students can come to us and say, I think we need to consider a different accommodation, or I'm having trouble with this. What do you think would help? We are here for them. And with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Anna to help lead you through questions about housing and other accommodations.
Hi again, everyone. So the first step for requesting housing accommodations is to complete that online self-registration, and that's the same link that we saw on the previous slide. Next, the student will submit the necessary documentation. Note that there is a 2-part form that is used specifically for housing accommodation requests, so it's possible that if a student is requesting both academic and housing accommodations, there will be 2 separate forms to submit. And the student completes Part A of that form and their provider completes Part B. After those materials have been submitted, the student schedules a time to meet with Leslie or myself. As Leslie said, we're meeting over the phone or Zoom these days. After that meeting, it's possible that we might take the student's request to William & Mary's Medical Review Committee for a recommendation. That's just a small group we meet with of university staff who we consult with on certain cases. And so after those steps are done, any housing accommodations that are approved will be sent to the student. The student will be notified via their William & Mary email. And the approved accommodations will also be sent to our partners in residence life so that the accommodations can be incorporated into the student's housing placement. And for future housing cycles in the student's future years at William & Mary, the student will be part of the accommodated housing process. this ensures that they have access to their accommodations on an ongoing basis. Not something to worry about right now. Students will get information about that along the way, but just to know that those accommodations will follow them throughout their time. And next, going to one of our specific housing requests, everyone's favorite, air conditioning. So William and Mary is a wonderfully historic campus. One of the quirks of that, though, is that not all of our buildings have air conditioning. We do make sure, though, that students for whom it's a medical necessity do have access to air conditioning. So the process, once again, first is to complete that self-registration. And then the student completes Part A and has their provider complete Part B of that same housing accommodation request form. The difference is if a student is only requesting air conditioning, we don't require them to schedule a meeting with us. We're always happy to talk to students, but generally it's not required. The requests tend to be pretty cut and dried. We will definitely reach out to the student if we have questions, but generally we don't need an appointment if that is the only thing being requested. And so if air conditioning is approved, our office will notify the student, and we will also notify Residence Life so that, again, they can incorporate that into the student's housing placement. And Residence Life does keep that information on file, so after it's been approved initially, it does follow them very easily from year to year, so that's not something to worry about. And the final process we'll go over is the restricted parking for medical reasons. So as you may know, first and second year students generally are not permitted to have a car on campus. As Leslie indicated, though, there are occasional exceptions that are approved by SAS. So again, if a student has frequent medical or mental health appointments that they cannot get to without a car, they may qualify for this accommodation. So they would start by completing the online registration. They would also submit a specific request for a restricted parking form, similar to the other ones that has a Part A completed by the student, a Part B completed by the provider. Similar to AC, if this is the only accommodation being requested, we often don't need to have the student schedule a meeting with us. But once again, we would definitely reach out to them if we did have questions. And if that is approved, again, the student would be notified, and we notify parking and transportation as well. That department would follow up with the student to give them some more specifics in terms of getting a parking pass, where exactly they are permitted to park, kind of more of those logistical details. This one does typically need to be renewed every semester, but we would let the student know on a case-by-case basis what the terms are. And before we move on to taking some of your questions, wanted to make sure you take note of a few important deadlines. The deadline for submitting housing accommodation requests, so that's air conditioning and all other housing accommodation requests, is June 1st. And we realize that's coming up right around the corner. The reason why that's a little bit earlier is because we do want to make sure that all these requests can be processed before Residence Life starts the process of assigning students to their dorm rooms. And all other accommodation requests, academic, parking, anything else, the deadline is July 15th. Please do know, though, that we consider accommodation requests on an ongoing basis. So I would say these are the dates by which, if materials are submitted by these dates, we can guarantee that accommodations, if approved, would be implemented by the beginning of the fall semester. If materials don't come until later, we definitely will consider them. It's just that it can get a little bit more complicated with the timeline, but definitely if it doesn't come until later, please don't hesitate to submit it anyway. And with that, we would love to open it up to your questions.
Thank you both so much for that presentation. I know we talked a lot about logistics and details, so I already have a question here. Are we going to be sharing the slides? Are we sharing the recording? Definitely. So just like the previous webinars, you may have received a recording in your email coming from families@wm.edu. That will be available to you again. Also, you can download the slides and view the recording at least one business day after today on our website. So we will go ahead and get into those questions. Please feel free to continue submitting those. We have our wonderful experts here with us for at least the next 10 or 15 minutes, so please don't hesitate to submit your questions. So I have a question here about Air conditioning. If air conditioning is approved and it's a window or individual unit, does the student have to pay an extra fee for that air conditioning?
That's a great question. I'm happy to take that one. No, the university picks up the tab for the cost of the air conditioning. So you do not have to worry about either buying an air conditioner or paying an additional fee once you get to William and Mary. That's considered a medical expense accommodation that we pay for. So.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm not seeing any questions at the moment, so feel free to continue submitting those. I have a question for you all. I know we did a pre-orientation programs webinar last week and you did discuss a bridge program. Would you be willing to discuss that just for a few moments while we wait on questions?
Sure, I'll take that one too. Our office helps to coordinate a lot of the logistics for the Neurodiversity Summer Bridge program. That program, though it will be online this year, it will still be meeting the same philosophy and what we're trying to do to build community among students as it has when we're in person. It's usually a weekend-long experience where students can come to campus, live in the residence halls, eat in the dining hall, and get a tour of campus from their peers. And these students often consider themselves neurodiverse. A lot of times that can simply mean they have some neurological based diagnosed condition. It can be anything from autism or Asperger's to ADHD to Tourette syndrome to, I mean, really, it's pretty expansive in terms of what it contains, but it's really to promote the value of different thinkers and also to give students a way to orient themselves and build community with other people who have that in common and maybe want a softer, gentler entry into William and Mary before they have orientation.
Wonderful, thank you. And you can find more information about that on the First Year Experience website and by watching our webinar from last week. I have a question here. What kind of accommodations are available at William and Mary? Is it extra time, exam modifications? Are there scribes, proctors, testing in a room with limited distractions? What is the scope of accommodations that we can provide?
Yes to all, but I'll let Anna take this one.
Great question. And yes, definitely, those are some of our most common ones. As Leslie said at the beginning, we do have a separate testing space, the Watson Testing Center, for our many students who do have testing accommodations, which definitely could include extended time on tests and or needing a reduced distraction space to take tests. In terms of scribes and readers, we do tend to try to help students find assistive technology solutions for those needs. So something like read aloud software, where the software on the computer can read aloud to the student what's on the screen as opposed to a human reader, or similarly using dictation software. Dragon might be a name that's familiar for some of you, but increasingly computers and programs like Microsoft Word are having that built in. So we're certainly not going to throw the student in the deep end with a new technology for their first exam, but we can help them get better acquainted with those types of tools. Other than testing accommodations, I would say some of our other more common ones probably include note-taking support. And what that has looked like in the past has sometimes been peer notes or access to a professor notes. We're finding more and more that students do benefit from, again, technology solutions. There's some really cool tools out there now. There's something called the Live Scribe Pen, which records while the student is writing. And that's the sort of thing we can provide for a student if they qualify for it as an accommodation. So yeah, I would say those are some of the more common ones.
Thank you. I'm getting some more questions here. What happens in a typical appointment with you to review accommodations?
You want to take that one, Anna?
Sure. So yeah, during that initial appointment, it definitely is a back and forth talking to the student about what has worked for them previously. And it could be that a lot of the supports they had in high school will continue on in college. And for some of them, it might be figuring out a different way to get at the same support. So again, maybe something like figuring out a technology solution for note-taking rather than peer notes. And throughout the semester, we do continue to meet with students if they find that their current accommodations aren't quite covering all their needs, we can certainly add accommodations at any time. If they need to consult about communicating with the professor about their needs, we're very happy to help with those conversations. So, we do have some students who do that initial appointment with us and that's it, but we also have many more who we meet with on a continuing basis as needed, and we always appreciate growing those relationships.
Wonderful. So I have a question again about our pre-recorded webinars or the webinars we've hosted previously. These are going directly to your family's email. So these are webinars designed for parents and families of new students. So we are sending the recordings and presentations to email addresses provided to us of being a family member. So your student won't see these in their email address. These are geared toward families. So you can find them at www.wm.edu/parents. That's a great place to go looking for other resources as well. Let's see, we have a few more questions. Is my student allowed to take all of their tests in the Watson lab or just the ones that are receiving accommodations?
Most students implement accommodations for all of their classes. And a lot of times it's a conversation between the professor and the student as far as what the student prefers. If it's a chemistry lab, for example, they may want to be in the chemistry lab for that, or we may not have the equipment to do that. So we often see that lab classes are taken in the actual lab. But then there are some particular classes that students would rather take it in the Watson lab. We are fine either way. We just want to make sure students get their accommodations needs met, and professors can do that, but we want to offer an additional resource to students and professors too to make sure that that can happen.
I have a couple questions here along the theme of, if my student is not in an air-conditioned room, can they bring their own air conditioner?
Unfortunately not. It really does require medical need in order to have the school install an air conditioning, and individual air conditioning units are not allowed to be brought per residence life regulations. So I wish I could say the answer is yes, but unfortunately the answer is no. There really needs to be a medical basis at this point in time.
Another question I have, given the uncertainty of the fall semester, are the deadlines for housing accommodations flexible at all?
Great question. I think right now we are trying to stick to the June 1st deadline in order to make sure we can get housing assignments expedited as quickly as possible. It is a lot harder to change a housing assignment. Once the housing assignments go out and people are assigned, we really want to try to make sure we get it done in early June. That said, just like Anna said, we will definitely consider each student's needs and accommodations, and as soon as space becomes available that meets the student's needs, even if they were approved later, we will try to move them. Sometimes it just is a wait, and we don't know exactly how long it'll take.
Thank you. So what should my student do if they need help while they are in a class?
Well, if they do need help while they're in a class, they're welcome to consult with us. We do encourage that if a student has accommodations, that they, at the beginning of the class, that they spend some time communicating with the professor to make sure that the professor understands they have accommodations. Now, if they find that they are struggling with something that they can't resolve themselves, we do want them to come to us, because we may have resources or solutions that they haven't thought of or that they didn't know existed.
Thank you. Are students with accommodations allowed to type exams rather than filling out blue books?
That could be a particular accommodation request. I would say it's not automatic for all students with accommodations, but if the student's condition impacts their ability to write in a blue book, then absolutely they should let us know that, and we can talk about whether typing makes sense as an accommodation. But that's definitely something that I can think of that some students do have as an accommodation, yes.
Another question here, are course substitutions available? What are the limitations at William & Mary for any course adjustments?
That's a great question, and it could probably be a webinar. I would say there are very special circumstances in which course substitutions would be considered. We do have a foreign language substitution that can be enacted. We usually do have to have some documentation to go that route, and the student typically takes rather than the foreign language class, they take a cultural related course for each level of a foreign language that they would need to take. However, if you do have more specific questions, I really encourage you to email us, because it gets nuanced and it's probably going to bore some of the people who it's not relevant to here.
Okay, I have one more question here that we're gonna address, and then if there are any other last minute questions, now would be the time to submit those. What type of accommodations do you provide for students with type 1 diabetes?
It definitely depends on the student's particular situation, and I would say that's true for all students. We really approach it on a personalized level. I would say for type 1 diabetes, some of the more common accommodations we see might be something like access to food and drink at all times. So making sure that if they're in class or even taking a test and they do need to have a snack or have something to drink, that they have the ability to do that. Similarly, maybe the ability to take a break during class if they do need to tend to their medical needs. Sometimes those students do need some extended time on test, or the ability to take a break during a test without the time continuing to run, again, so that they can address their medical needs. I also think we often put in an accommodation, something like access to personal medical equipment. So if they have a pump or even their phone that they need for diabetes related reasons, they can feel comfortable having that with them at all times. So those are the more common ones that I think of.
Thank you. I had another question come in. Is it acceptable for us to request our student's high school to submit to you his psych evaluation, which was required for high school accommodations? Due to quarantine, we don't have access to our files right now.
It may vary from school to school in terms of what they take. We understand that this is a challenging time to get documentation in general from your medical provider or otherwise. So let us know about your specific circumstance and we can work with you. We understand that there may be a delay in getting all the paperwork. And just to add on a note, sometimes people wonder if they need to send their student's IEP or 504 plan along with their documentation. We are happy to receive that. We will look at all the information. Sometimes it's helpful to know what a student has had in the past. It doesn't necessarily determine what the outcome will be, but we'll definitely take that into consideration, and it's just helpful information for us.
Thank you. Okay, no more questions. I'm just going to give you all the floor for any last words that you would like to give our families before we close out this evening.
I want to say it's such a pleasure to get to know all the students who register with us, and we're here to meet a lot of their needs. Sometimes we're just their first point of contact whenever they have a question. And we in the Dean of Students office, we are part of the Dean of Students office, we consider ourselves like a conduit of resources. So no matter what a student has a question about, we want to make sure that their needs are met. So we really have a personalized approach in terms of the students we work with.
Yeah, and I'll add that certainly having a disability or diagnosed condition is not a limitation at William and Mary. You know, we work with students again to provide that equal access, and we've seen students just do so well. And thinking about graduation this past weekend and seeing so many of our students succeed is really gratifying. As Leslie mentioned earlier, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at any time. Again, it doesn't only have to be when steps 1 and 2 and forms A and B are completed. We know there's a lot of forms and processes to look over. So if you could use just a personal phone call to talk about the process, we're happy to do that.
Well, thank you both. I have the distinct privilege of working with Anna and Leslie on a daily basis, and I can tell you that if your students get to interact with either of them, they are in fabulous hands. They truly care about the success of our students and want to make sure that their William and Mary experience is really wonderful. So thank you both for spending time with our families this evening and with us on this webinar. Thank you again for being here, families, and we will see you on the next one. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.